The Joy Luck Club by Amy Tan shares the stories of four mothers and four daughters as they learn from each other's experiences. In this piece, Jing Mei Wu delights in deceiving her old deaf piano teacher, Old Chong, and in spoiling her mother's plans for her to become a prodigy. The piece is appealing to all of us, as we can recall times as a child when we played tricks and had different ideas and dreams than our parents. Do we remember why those moments were so important to us? Do we feel the same? I hope you enjoy this piece from the Joy Luck Club by Amy Tan. A few weeks later, Old Chong and my mother conspired to have me play in a talent show, which would be held in the church hall. By then, my parents had saved up enough to buy a second-hand piano, a black Wurlitzer, linnet with a scarred bench. It was the showpiece of our living room. For the talent show, I was to play a piece called Pleading Child from Schumann's Scenes from Childhood. It was a simple, moody piece that sounded more difficult than it was. I was supposed to memorize the whole thing, playing the repeat parts twice to make the piece sound longer. But I dawdled over it, playing a few bars and then cheating to look up to see what the other notes were that followed. I never really listened to what I was playing. I daydreamed about being somewhere else, about being someone else. The part that I liked to practice the best was a fancy curtsy. Right foot out, touch the rose on the carpet with a pointed foot, sweep to the side, left leg bends, look up, and smile. My parents invited all the couples from the Joy Luck Club to witness my debut. Auntie Lindo and Uncle Tin were there. Waverly and her two older brothers had also come. The first two rows were filled with children, both younger and older than I was. The littlest ones got to go first. They recited simple nursery rhymes, squawked out tunes on miniature violins, twirled hula hoops, pranced in pink ballet tutus, and when they bowed and curtsied, the audience would sigh in unison, "Ah," and then clap enthusiastically. When my turn came, I was very confident. I remember my childish excitement. It was as if I knew, without a doubt, that a prodigy side of me really did exist. I had no fear whatsoever, no nervousness. I remember thinking to myself, "This is it! This is it!" I looked out over the audience at my mother's blank face, my father's yawn, Auntie Lindo's stiff-lipped smile, Waverly's sulky expression. I had on a white dress, layered with sheets of lace, and a pink bow in my Peter Pan haircut. As I sat down, I envisioned people jumping to their feet and Ed Sullivan rushing up to introduce me to everyone on TV. And I started to play. It was so beautiful. I was so caught up in how lovely I looked that at first I didn't worry how I would sound. So it was a surprise to me when I hit the first wrong note and realized something didn't sound quite right. And then I hit another, and another followed that. A chill started at the top of my head and began to trickle down. Yet I couldn't stop playing, as though my hands were bewitched. I kept thinking my fingers would adjust themselves back, like a train switching to the right track. I played this strange jumble through 2 repeats, the sour notes staying with me all the way to the end. When I stood up, I discovered my legs were shaking. Maybe I had just been nervous, and the audience, like Old Chong, had seen me go through all the right motions and had not heard anything wrong at all. I swept my right foot out, went down on my knee, looked up and smiled. The room was very quiet, except for Old Chong, who was beaming and shouting, "Bravo! Bravo! Well done!" But then I saw my mother's face, her stricken face. The audience clapped weakly, and as I walked back to my chair, with my whole face quivering as I tried not to cry, I heard a little boy whisper loudly to his mother, "That was awful!" And the mother whispered back, "Well, she certainly tried." And now I realized how many people were in the audience, the whole world it seemed. I was aware of my eyes burning into my back. I felt the shame of my mother and father as they sat stiffly through the rest of the show. We could have escaped during intermission. Pride and some strange sense of honor must have anchored my parents to their chairs. And so we watched it all. The 18-year-old boys with fake mustache who did a magic show and juggled flaming hoops while riding a unicycle. The breasted girl with white makeup who sang from Madama Butterfly and got honorable mention, and the 11-year-old boy who won first prize playing a tricky violin song that sounded like a busy bee. After the show, the Sues and Jongs and the St. Clairs from Joy Luck Club came up to my mother and father. Lots of talented kids, Auntie Lindo said vaguely, smiling broadly. That was something else, said my father, and I wondered if he was referring to me in a humorous way, or whether he even remembered what I had done. Waverly looked at me and shrugged her shoulders. You aren't a genius like me, she said matter-of-factly, and if I hadn't felt so bad, I would have pulled her braids and punched her in the stomach. But my mother's expression was what devastated me, a quiet, blank look that said she had lost everything. I felt the same way, and it seemed as if everybody were now coming up, like gawkers at the scene of an accident, to see what parts were actually missing. When we got on the bus to go home, my father was humming the Busy Bee tune, and my mother was silent. I kept thinking she wanted to wait until we got home before shouting at me. But when my father unlocked the door to our apartment, my mother walked in and then went to the back into the bedroom. No accusations, no blame. And in a way, I felt disappointed. I had been waiting for her to start shouting so I could shout back and cry and blame her for all of my misery. I assumed my talent show fiasco meant I never had to play the piano again. But 2 days later, after school, my mother came out of the kitchen and saw me watching TV. 4 o'clock, she reminded me as if it were any other day. I was stunned, as though she were asking me to go through the talent show torture again. I wedged myself more tightly in front of the TV. Turn off TV, she called more tightly. From the kitchen 5 minutes later, I didn't budge, and then I decided I didn't have to do what my mother said anymore. I wasn't her slave. This wasn't China. I had listened to her before, and look what happened. She was the stupid one. She came out from the kitchen and stood in the arch entryway of the living room. 4 o'clock, she said again, louder. I'm not going to play any more, I said nonchalantly. Why should I? I'm not a genius. She walked over and stood in front of the TV. I saw her chest was heaving up and down in an angry way. No, I said, and now I felt stronger, as if my true self had finally emerged. So this is what had been inside me all along. No, I won't, I screamed. She yanked me by the arm, pulled me off the floor, snapped off the TV. She was frighteningly strong, half pulling, half carrying me toward the piano as I kicked the throw rugs under my feet. She lifted me up and onto the hard bench. I was sobbing now, looking at her bitterly. Her chest was heaving even more, and her mouth was open, smiling crazily as if she was pleased that I was crying. You want me to become someone I'm not, I sobbed. I'll never be the kind of daughter you want me to be. Only 2 kinds of daughters, she shouted in Chinese. Those who are obedient and those who follow their own mind. Only 1 kind of daughter can live in this house, obedient daughter. Then I wish I wasn't your daughter. I wish you weren't my mother, I shouted. As if I said these things, I got scared. It felt like worms and toads and slimy things crawling out of my chest. But it also felt good, as if this awful side of me had surfaced at last. Too late change this, my mother said shrilly, and I could sense her anger rising to its breaking point. I wanted to see it spill over, and that's when I remembered the babies she had lost in China, the ones we never talked about. Then I wish I'd never been born, I shouted. I wish I were dead, like them. It was as if I had said the magic words. Alakazam! Her face went blank, her mouth closed, her arms went slack, and she backed out of the room, stunned, as if she were blowing away like a small brown leaf, thin, brittle, and lifeless.